The rain fell like liquid silver through the perpetual twilight of New Haven's merchant quarter, each drop catching the glow of bioluminescent street lamps that lined the narrow thoroughfares. Jack's meridian hunched deeper into his worn jacket, hands shoved into pockets that had long since given up any pretense of keeping out the cold. The leather satchel slung across his shoulder contained 3 failed restorations, each one representing a week's worth of work that wouldn't earn him enough to cover next month's rent. At 29, Jax had already lived several lifetimes' worth of disappointment. His mother's artifact restoration business, once the pride of New Haven's cultural district, had crumbled after her death 3 years ago. The clients who'd trusted her expertise had little faith in her son's abilities, despite the fact that she'd taught him everything she knew. Now he worked from a converted storage unit on the edge of the port district, taking jobs nobody else wanted, broken trinkets from species whose names he couldn't pronounce, devices whose purposes remained mysteries even after restoration. The street market was winding down for the evening. Vendors packed away their wares with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized by years of routine. Jax walked past the familiar faces without greeting them. He'd learned that friendliness often led to questions about his business, and those questions inevitably led to pitying looks he couldn't stomach. He was 3 blocks from his workshop when he heard it. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the city, the hiss of steam from underground vents, the rhythmic clang of the port's loading mechanisms, the multilingual chatter of a dozen species going about their evening routines. It was a child's cry, but not the ordinary wail of a tired or hungry youngster. This was the sound of profound distress, the kind of sobbing that came from a place deeper than physical discomfort. Jax's first instinct was to keep walking. He had enough problems without adding someone else's to the collection. His workshop was cold. His dinner would consist of whatever protein paste packets he had left in the cupboard, and he had 3 restoration attempts to puzzle over before he could even think about sleep. The last thing he needed was to get involved in someone else's drama. But his feet stopped moving anyway. He turned slowly, scanning the street for the source of the crying. The market stalls cast long shadows in the lamplight, creating pockets of darkness where anything might hide. For a moment he thought perhaps he'd imagined it, that his exhaustion had conjured sounds from the city's constant background noise. Then he saw her. The child sat hunched against the base of a defunct water fountain, her small form nearly invisible in the gathering dark. What caught Jax's attention first wasn't her size or her posture. It was the way the light seemed to refract, strangely around her, as if reality itself couldn't quite decide how to render her presence. He'd seen that effect before, though only in the rarest of artifacts that dealt with probability matrices or quantum fluctuations. Jax approached slowly, his restoration instincts kicking in before his common sense could object. As he drew closer, details emerged from the shadows. The child couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, though with non-human species, age could be difficult to judge. Her skin held a luminescent quality, pale as moonlight with an underlying shimmer that suggested bioluminescence. But it was her eyes that made Jax's breath catch. They were silver, completely silver, with no visible pupil or iris, yet he could tell she was looking down at something in her hands with an intensity that spoke of desperation. "Hey there," Jax said softly, crouching down several feet away so he wouldn't startle her. "Are you okay?" The child's head snapped up, those silver eyes fixing on him with an intelligence that seemed far too old for her apparent age. Tears tracked down her luminescent cheeks, catching the light like trails of liquid crystal. She said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes being played underwater. Beautiful but completely incomprehensible. Jax held up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I don't understand. But maybe I can help anyway." The child looked down at her hands again, and Jax followed her gaze. She was clutching something, a device of some kind, though it was unlike anything he'd seen in his years of restoration work. It appeared to be made of crystalline material that shifted through a spectrum of colors, with delicate metalwork wrapped around it in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The device was beautiful, clearly precious, and thoroughly broken. Pieces of it were missing, and the remaining sections were cracked in ways that suggested both physical trauma and something more fundamental, as if the very structure of the object had been damaged on a level beyond mere material fracture. "Let me see," Jax said, pointing to the device and then to himself. "Maybe I can fix it?" The child hesitated, clutching the broken object closer to her chest. Then, slowly, she extended her hands, offering the device to him with obvious reluctance. The moment Jax's fingers made contact with it, he felt a subtle vibration, like the echo of a tuning fork that hadn't been struck in years. The sensation traveled up his arms and settled somewhere behind his sternum, warm and inexplicably sad. He turned the device over carefully, his trained eye cataloging the damage. The crystalline core was fractured but not shattered. That was good. The metalwork had been bent but not broken, which meant he could potentially realign it. But there were gaps, spaces where components had clearly been, and without knowing what those pieces were or what they did, restoration would be nearly impossible. Still, he'd attempted impossible restorations before. Usually they failed, but occasionally. "Okay," Jax said, meeting those strange silver eyes. "I think I can help. But my workshop is about 3 blocks from here. Will you come with me?" The child didn't respond verbally, but she stood up on unsteady legs. She was small, barely reaching Jax's waist, and her clothing was simple, a tunic and leggings made from fabric that seemed to shimmer with the same quality as her skin. On her feet were soft boots that looked handmade, decorated with symbols that matched the patterns on the broken device. Jax stood as well, moving slowly so he wouldn't frighten her. "My name is Jax," he said, pointing to himself. "Jax." The child cocked her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Then she pointed to herself and said something. That sounded like Nessa, though the pronunciation was fluid, with harmonics that his human vocal cords probably couldn't replicate. "Nessa," Jax repeated, doing his best. "Okay, Nessa. Let's get you somewhere warm and see what we can do about this." He held up the broken device. They walked through the darkening streets, an odd pair that drew curious glances from the few remaining pedestrians. Jax was acutely aware of every stare, every whispered comment in languages he didn't understand. He tried to project confidence, as if walking with a crying alien child through the merchant quarter was something he did every evening. His workshop was tucked between a parts supplier that had closed down 6 months ago and a noodle shop that did most of its business with the late-night port workers. The sign above his door, Meridian Restoration Services, flickered erratically, the R having burned out weeks ago. He really needed to fix that, but the replacement bulb cost more than he could spare. The door's lock was temperamental, requiring just the right combination of jiggling and firm pressure. Jax had been meaning to replace it for months, but like most things in his life, it remained on a list of repairs he couldn't afford. Finally, the mechanism gave way, and the door swung inward with a groan. Inside, the workshop was exactly as he'd left it, which was to say, chaotic. Workbenches lined 3 walls, their surfaces covered with tools, components, half-finished projects, and the accumulated detritus of a failing business. Shelves reached toward the ceiling, crammed with jars of screws, boxes of wire, containers of exotic materials he'd acquired from clients who couldn't pay in credits. In the center of the room stood his main workstation, dominated by a magnification array his mother had built by hand. Its multiple lenses and adjustable arms looking like a mechanical spider frozen in mid-reach. Jax flicked on the overhead lights, which buzzed to life reluctantly. The workshop wasn't much. Drafty in winter, stifling in summer, and never quite as clean as it should be, but it was his. The last remnant of his mother's legacy, the final proof that he existed for some purpose beyond mere survival. Nessa stepped inside cautiously, those silver eyes taking in everything. Jax watched her examine his workshop with the same intensity she'd directed at her broken device. He wondered what she saw, whether the chaos looked like creative disorder or just disorder, whether the worn tools and aging equipment seemed quaint or pathetic. "Make yourself comfortable," Jax said, gesturing to a stool near the workstation. "This might take a while." He cleared space on his main bench, sweeping aside the failed restorations he'd been agonizing over. They suddenly seemed trivial compared to the broken device he now placed under his magnification array. As he positioned the first lens, Jax felt that familiar tingle of anticipation that always preceded his best work. The sense that he was about to attempt something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Nessa climbed onto the stool, her small hands gripping its edge. She watched every movement Jax made with an attention that was both flattering and unnerving. Dawn came to New Haven not with golden light, but with a gradual brightening of the perpetual violet haze that passed for sky in this corner of the colony world. Jax woke with a start, his neck protesting the awkward angle he'd maintained while dozing on the workbench stool. For a disoriented moment, he couldn't remember why he was in his workshop instead of the small apartment above it, or why his back felt like someone had used it for hammer practice. Then he saw the child. Nessa was awake, standing at the window that looked out onto the alley behind his workshop. The blanket had slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. In the morning's dim light, her luminescent skin seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat made visible. She was tracing patterns on the grimy glass with one finger, leaving trails that glowed briefly before fading. "Good morning," Jax said, his voice rough from sleep. She turned, those silver eyes regarding him with the same unsettling intelligence he'd noticed last night. In the better light, he could see more details. Her hair was long, falling past her shoulders in waves that seemed to move independently of any breeze, each strand catching light like spun glass. Across her forehead ran delicate markings, not tattoos, but patterns in her skin itself, like circuit traces made of starlight. Jax stood slowly, joints popping in protest. He was too young to feel this old, but poverty and stress had a way of aging a person prematurely. He crossed to the workbench where Nessa's device lay, its crystalline core still glowing faintly in the shadowed workshop. "I did what I could," he said, picking up the device carefully. "But it's not complete. There are missing pieces I can't replace." Nessa approached, her bare feet making no sound on the concrete floor. When she was close enough, Jax held out the device. She took it with both hands, cradling it like something infinitely precious. Her silver eyes closed, and for a long moment, she stood perfectly still. Then the device began to glow brighter. Jax took an involuntary step back as light bloomed from the crystalline core, casting prismatic patterns across the workshop walls. The patterns weren't random. They formed shapes, equations, probability matrices that hurt to look at directly. He recognized some of the mathematical structures from his mother's advanced restoration manuals, the sections on quantum-locked artifacts and probability state devices. Nessa opened her eyes, and Jax saw tears tracking down her cheeks again. But this time her expression wasn't one of despair. It was something more complex. Grief mixed with gratitude, loss tempered by hope. She spoke, her wind chime language filling the workshop with sounds that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate somewhere deeper. Jax understood nothing of the words themselves, but the emotion behind them was universal. "You're welcome," he said softly. "I wish I could have fixed it completely." A noise from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps in the alley accompanied by voices, multiple voices, speaking in rapid, agitated tones. Jax moved to the window, peering through the grime-covered glass. 3 figures stood in the alley. 2 were human, wearing the gray uniforms of port security. The third was unlike anything Jax had seen in his years on New Haven. Tall and impossibly slender, with skin that held the same luminescent quality as Nessa's, but darker, like midnight compared to dawn. The figure's silver eyes swept the alley with methodical precision, missing nothing. "They're looking for you," Jax said. Though he suspected Nessa already knew, the child moved away from the window, positioning herself behind Jax's main workbench. Her small hands still clutched the partially restored device, and her expression had shifted to something that looked like fear. The knock on the workshop door came 3 seconds later, sharp, authoritative, the kind of knock that expected immediate compliance. Jax glanced at Nessa, who shook her head frantically. Whatever those people represented, she didn't want to be found by them. Every instinct Jax possessed screamed at him to open the door, to hand over the child to whoever had legal authority here. He was already one rent payment away from homelessness. He couldn't afford to add harboring a missing child to his list of problems, but those silver eyes held such terror that Jax found himself moving to the door not to open it, but to check that it was securely locked. The knock came again, harder this time. "Security sweep," a voice called. "Open up." Jax took a breath, then cracked the door open just wide enough to show his face. "Can I help you?" The nearest security officer, a stocky woman with a scar across her jawline, held up a hollow display. "We're looking for a missing child. Aurelian female, approximately 6 standard years old. Have you seen anyone matching this description?" The image on the display showed Nessa, though the photo appeared to be from some kind of database rather than a casual capture. Identifying information scrolled beside her image. Designation numbers, genetic markers, origin coordinates. "Aurelian?" Jax said, stalling for time. "I'm not familiar with that species." "Small luminescent skin, silver eyes," the other officer said impatiently. "We have reason to believe she may be in this sector." "I've been working alone all night," Jax lied, surprised by how smoothly the falsehood came. "Haven't seen any children." The tall Aurelian figure stepped forward, and Jax got his first clear look at her face. She was female, with features that suggested age despite the luminescent smoothness of her skin. Markings similar to Nessa's traced her forehead, but more elaborate, suggesting status or rank. When she spoke, her voice carried the same wind chime quality as Nessa's, but there was steel beneath the music. "The child carries a probability compass," she said in flawless standard. "Such devices emit distinctive energy signatures. My instruments detected one in this vicinity 3 hours ago." Jax kept his expression neutral, though his heart was hammering. "I restore artifacts for a living. I've got all kinds of devices in here that might emit unusual signatures." "Then you won't mind if we conduct a search," the scarred officer said, already moving forward. "Actually, I do mind," Jax said, not moving from the doorway. "Unless you have a warrant, my workshop is private property." The officer's hand moved to the stunner at her belt. "We can get a warrant if necessary, but that will take time, and the child may be in danger." "What kind of danger?" Jax asked, genuinely curious now. The Aurelian woman's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or respect. "Aurelian children with active probability sensing abilities can inadvertently destabilize local reality fields if they experience trauma or extreme emotion. The child who is missing—" She paused, and Jax caught a glimpse of something deeper than professional concern in those silver eyes. "She is my granddaughter. Her name is Nessa. She has been missing since yesterday evening." The word granddaughter shifted everything. This wasn't just a bureaucratic search for lost property. This was a grandmother looking for her family. Jax's hand was already moving toward the lock when a sound stopped him. From inside the workshop came a soft, distinctive chime, the sound of Nessa's device activating at a higher frequency. And with that sound, something extraordinary happened. The probability matrices Jax had seen glowing on his workshop walls suddenly manifested in the alley. Geometric patterns appeared in midair, visible to everyone, pulsing with colors that didn't exist in normal spectrum. The security officers stumbled backward. Hands moving to weapons they clearly had no idea how to use against mathematics made manifest. But the Aurelian grandmother simply smiled, a complex expression mixing relief, pride and worry in equal measure. "She's here," she said quietly, "and she's frightened enough that her abilities are manifesting without the compass's regulation." She looked directly at Jax. "Please, I need to see her. I need to help her calm down before she accidentally collapses a probability well and takes half this building with her." Jax believed her. He didn't fully understand what a probability well was, but the urgency in her tone was genuine. More importantly, the way she'd said Nessa's name with love and desperation told him everything he needed to know about her intentions. He stepped back, opening the door fully. She's scared. She ran from something. And I don't think it was you. The grandmother entered the workshop alone, leaving the security officers outside. As she crossed the threshold, the probability matrices in the alley faded, as if her presence had stabilized whatever Nessa's abilities had disrupted. Nessa emerged from behind the workbench, still clutching her device. When she saw her grandmother, her face transformed. She said something in rapid musical Aurelian, and the grandmother responded in kind, her voice carrying harmonics of comfort and reassurance. They embraced, and Jax felt like an intruder in his own workshop. The moment was too private, too profound for outside observation. He turned toward his workbench, giving them space. But the grandmother's voice stopped him. "Thank you," she said in Standard, "for protecting her, for not turning her over to authorities who would have brought her directly back to those she was fleeing." Who was she fleeing? Jax asked. The grandmother's expression hardened. "My daughter's husband. Nessa's father." She spoke the word father like a curse. He is human, and he never understood what it means to raise an Aurelian child with active abilities. When Nessa's compass was damaged yesterday during one of his episodes, she ran. Episodes, Jax's hands clenched involuntarily. "He drinks," the grandmother said flatly. "And when he drinks, he be..." The first full day with Nessa taught Jax several important lessons. First, Aurelian children apparently didn't need much sleep. Nessa seemed content with 4 hours of rest compared to his human requirement of 7 or 8. Second, everything in his workshop fascinated her with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. And third, probability sensing abilities manifested in ways he'd never imagined. It started with breakfast. Jax had climbed to his apartment above the workshop to scrounge up something resembling a meal. His cupboards were predictably bare: 3 protein paste packets, a bag of stale grain crisps, and half a container of synthetic orange juice that had probably expired 2 weeks ago. He was arranging this pathetic spread on a plate when he heard a small gasp from behind him. Nessa had followed him up the narrow stairs, her bare feet silent on the worn treads. She stood in the doorway of his tiny kitchen, silver eyes wide as she stared at the meal preparation with an expression of profound distress. "What's wrong?" Jax asked, immediately alert for danger. Nessa pointed at the protein paste packet he'd been about to open. She said something in Aurelian, then struggled to translate. "Bad future. Sick future." "It's just protein paste," Jax said. "Tastes terrible, but it's safe enough." She shook her head emphatically, then closed her eyes. Her compass, which she'd set on the counter, began to glow brighter. Jax watched in fascination as probability matrices manifested in the air between them, not as dramatically as yesterday's display, but subtle geometric patterns that seemed to branch and fork like decision trees made visible. Nessa opened her eyes and pointed at a different packet, one of the other protein pastes. "This one. Not sick." Jax picked up the packet she'd indicated, then looked at the one he'd originally chosen. They appeared identical. Same brand, same flavor designation, same expiration date. But something in Nessa's conviction made him pause. He grabbed a food safety scanner from his workshop's emergency kit, a tool he rarely used but his mother had insisted on keeping, and tested both packets. The first packet, the one he'd chosen, registered normal. The second packet, Nessa's choice, also registered normal. Jax was about to dismiss her concern as childish anxiety when he noticed something. The first packet's nutritional seal had an almost imperceptible crack in it, so small his eyes had missed it entirely. According to the scanner, the seal was technically intact. But Jax knew from experience that microfractures could allow bacterial contamination that wouldn't show up until after consumption. "You can see the future?" Jax asked slowly. Nessa frowned, struggling with the concept. "Not see? Feel? Many futures like..." She gestured at the probability matrices, still floating faintly in the air, like paths. Some paths have bad endings, some good. I feel which path we walk. And that packet would have made me sick? Tomorrow. Not big sick, small sick. But why choose sick path when good path is there? It was difficult to argue with that logic. Jax opened the packet Nessa had indicated, divided the unappetizing paste between two bowls, and added the grain crisps and juice. They ate in his small living space, barely large enough for a sleeping mat, a storage trunk, and a portable heating unit that rattled ominously whenever it ran. Nessa ate slowly, examining each bite as if it might reveal secrets. "You live very small," she observed. "I live cheap," Jax corrected. "There's a difference. Small is a choice. Cheap is a necessity. Grandmother Morel lives small too, but she has beautiful things, old things that sing with memory." "My mother had things like that," Jax said quietly. "I sold most of them after she died. Needed to pay for the cremation and settle her debts." Nessa set down her spoon, those silver eyes focusing on him with uncomfortable intensity. "You are sad. The sadness has many futures branching from it. Some futures you stay sad forever. Some futures," she tilted her head. "Some futures you find new beautiful things, new reasons to sing." "I don't sing," Jax said, trying for humor to deflect the conversation. "Everyone sings," Nessa said seriously. "Some people just forget how." After breakfast, they returned to the workshop. Jax had 3 restoration projects waiting, work he'd been neglecting while helping Nessa. The first was a Vrixian memory cube whose quantum storage matrix had corrupted. The second was a human antique, a mechanical timepiece from Earth that someone's great-grandfather had brought during the initial colony wave. The third was a fragment of what appeared to be Aurelian origin, though the client hadn't specified the species, a small metallic disc covered in inscriptions that shifted and changed whenever he looked away. Nessa was immediately drawn to the Aurelian disc. She approached Jax's workbench where it lay under a magnification array, her compass beginning to pulse in rhythm with the disc's subtle energy signature. "You know what this is?" Jax asked. Nessa nodded slowly. "Memory keeper, very old. From before the scattering." "The scattering?" "When Aurelian people left homeworld. When we became—" She searched for the word. "Scattered. Like seeds in wind, finding new places to grow." Jax had heard fragments of this history. Something about environmental collapse on the Aurelian homeworld, a mass exodus, populations scattered across a dozen colony worlds. But the details were vague, buried in historical databases he'd never bothered to access. "Can you read what it says?" he asked. Nessa placed her small hand on the disc. The inscriptions stopped shifting, stabilizing into patterns that Jax could finally focus on properly. She read slowly, translating as she went. "In the 3rd year after the alignment, we departed our dying star. We carried with us the old songs, the probability maps, the knowledge of how to read reality's deeper currents. We swore that wherever we landed, we would remember what we were, that we would teach our children the old ways even as we learned new ones. This memory keeper is my promise. Kalen of House Morel, Navigator First Class, to those who come after." "House Morel," Jax repeated. "That's your family name." "Kalen was my great-great-great-grandmother," Nessa said, her voice filled with awe. "This is our family's memory keeper. How did you get this?" "A client brought it in 3 weeks ago. Human man named Thomas Reeves. Said he'd acquired it in an estate sale, wanted it cleaned and authenticated." Jax pulled up the work order on his tablet. "He's supposed to pick it up next week." Nessa's expression shifted, silver eyes going distant in a way that made the probability matrices around her compass pulse more intensely. "This Thomas Reeves. He should not have this. It was stolen. Do you know that, or are you sensing future paths?" "I know this," Nessa said firmly. "Memory keepers stay with family, always. They are not sold or traded. If this one left House Morel, it was taken by force or deception." Jax sat back, rubbing his temples. This was getting complicated. If the disc really was stolen property, he had a legal obligation to report it. But that would mean involving authorities, which meant risking questions about Nessa's presence in his workshop. And there was another issue. Reeves had already paid a deposit. If Jax refused to complete the restoration and return the disc, he'd be in breach of contract. "What do you want me to do?" he asked Nessa. She looked at him with surprise. "You ask me? It's your family's property. Your decision matters." Nessa considered this, her small face serious beyond her years. "Give it to Grandmother Morell. She will know how it was lost. She will know if we can reclaim it properly." "I'll lose the contract payment," Jax said. "Probably get a bad reputation among clients, too. Word spreads fast in the restoration community." "But it would be right," Nessa said simply. "And right paths lead to better futures than wrong paths, even when wrong paths look easier." Jax found himself smiling despite the financial implications. "You know, for a 6-year-old, you're pretty wise." "I am 73, Nessa said seriously. Jax blinked. "What?" "In Aurelian years. We count different, slower sun cycles on homeworld." She paused, thinking. "I am 6.2 in your years, but 73 in mine. So I am wise for 6, but normal for 73. Actually, that makes my head hurt." Nessa giggled, the first genuine laugh Jax had heard from her. The sound seemed to brighten the workshop, making even the grimy windows and cluttered workbenches seem less depressing. They worked together through the morning. Jax was surprised by how helpful Nessa could be. Her small hands could reach into tight spaces his fingers couldn't manage, and her probability sensing gave her an almost supernatural intuition for which tool he'd need next. She would hand him a specific wrench moments before he realized he needed it, or warn him when a particular adjustment would lead to component failure 3 steps down the line. "How do you know these things?" Jax asked after she prevented him from making a critical error on the Vrixian memory cube. "I see the paths," she explained again. "When you reach for wrong tool, I see the future where things break. When you reach for right tool, I see future where things fix. I just tell you which future is better." "That's an incredible ability." Nessa's expression darkened. "Father says it's unnatural. Says I should stop seeing futures, just live in present like normal people." "Your father is an idiot," Jax said before he could stop himself. Nessa's eyes widened. Then she smiled, a small, almost guilty expression. "Grandmother says we shouldn't speak badly of family." "Sometimes family earns bad speaking," Jax said. "Your father hurt you. He broke your compass. He made you cry in the street. That's not what—"